The room was loud, not with noise, but with confidence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling of the private Manhattan learning hall. People in tailored suits filled the seats. Investors, professors, translators, and guests who believed intelligence could only belong to those who looked successful. At the center of the room stood Richard Halvorson, a self-made millionaire, a man who loved challenges, especially ones he was sure no one could win. He smiled the way people smile when they already know the ending. Languages, Richard said, holding up an old, leather-bound notebook. Everyone claims to understand them, but understanding is different from mastery. Soft laughter moved through the crowd. Then, the door opened. A boy stepped inside. He couldn't have been more than 14. His shoes were worn. His jacket was too thin for winter. And his eyes, quiet, observant, scanned the room without fear. People noticed him immediately, not because he was important, but because he didn't belong. The boy didn't sit in the front. He chose the last row. He placed a small notebook on his lap, its pages folded and repaired with tape. His hands were steady, calm. Richard noticed him too. He paused mid-sentence. "Well," Richard said, amused, "I don't remember inviting a school tour." Laughter grew louder this time. The boy looked up, not offended, not embarrassed, just listening. Richard continued, enjoying the attention. "Tonight is about excellence, about the highest level of skill." He tapped the notebook in his hand. "This text," he said, "contains passages in rare and ancient languages. Some of them aren't even taught anymore." The audience leaned forward. Richard smiled wider. "I'm offering $1 million to anyone who can translate it accurately." Gasps echoed through the room. 1 million, Richard repeated. "For knowledge." The boy's fingers tightened slightly around his notebook. No one moved. Not the professors. Not the professionals. Then, a small hand rose from the back. The room went still. Richard blinked. "Did someone bring their child to work?" he said, squinting. The boy stood. "I can try," he said softly. The crowd erupted in laughter. Richard laughed the loudest. "You," he said, "you can barely afford a seat." The boy didn't respond. Richard walked closer, curiosity mixed with mockery. "Tell me, son," he said, lowering his voice, "what language do you even speak?" The boy looked at him calmly. "That depends," he replied. "On who's listening." The laughter faded just a little. Richard opened the notebook. "Let's start simple," he said. "This is Old Portuguese. Translate the first line." He handed the book to the boy. The boy didn't hesitate. He read quietly, then spoke. Perfect pronunciation, perfect meaning. The room froze. Richard smiled awkwardly. "Lucky guess," he said quickly. "Let's move on." He flipped the page. Classical Arabic. The boy translated again. Clear, fluent, accurate. Someone whispered, "That's not possible." Richard's smile tightened. He laughed, but this time it sounded forced. "All right," he said louder now. "Let's make this interesting." He flipped to another page. "This one," he said, "is written in a dialect most scholars can't even identify." The boy looked at the page, and for the first time, he paused. The room held its breath. The boy's voice was calm, too calm for a room that had stopped breathing. He spoke slowly, carefully, each word measured, as if he were placing it somewhere sacred. The unfamiliar symbols on the page turned into meaning. History, loss, a promise written by someone who knew they would never return. When he finished, no one clapped. No one laughed. They simply stared. Richard Halvorson blinked twice. "That's," he said, then stopped himself. "That's still not proof." He took the notebook back, flipping the pages faster now. "Anyone can memorize one obscure passage," he said, raising his voice. "This means nothing." The boy stepped back to his place. He didn't argue. He didn't smile. He waited. Richard cleared his throat. "This next one," he announced, "is written in Aramaic. Not modern. Ancient." A few professors shifted in their seats. Someone whispered, "No one uses that fluently." Richard handed the book over again. The boy read silently. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. A flicker of relief crossed Richard's face. But then the boy spoke. The sound was unfamiliar, soft, precise, almost musical. He translated not just the words, but the emotion behind them. When he finished, an elderly man in the front row stood up. "That was accurate," he said quietly. "Painfully accurate." A murmur swept through the room. Richard laughed sharply. "Well," he said, "that's two." He leaned closer to the boy. "But let's see how long your luck lasts." Richard flipped to another page. "Latin," he said quickly. "Legal Latin." The boy didn't even look nervous. He translated. Flawlessly. The room changed. Phones came out. Whispers grew louder. Eyes followed the boy wherever he moved. Richard felt it. The shift. The attention that used to belong to him was slipping. "You learned this where?" Richard asked suddenly. The boy hesitated. "Places," he said. "People don't usually look." Richard scoffed. "Books cost money," he said. "Teachers cost money." The boy met his eyes. "Listening doesn't." As Richard searched for the next test, the boy's mind drifted, not away, but inward. He remembered sitting on cold bus benches, listening to strangers argue in languages no one bothered to translate. He remembered janitors speaking softly late at night, thinking no one understood them. He remembered libraries where no one asked why a child stayed so as long as he stayed quiet. Languages were never a talent to him. They were survival. Richard opened the notebook again. "This," he said slowly, "is Mandarin. Formal. Written." A few people shook their heads. The boy read, then spoke. The pronunciation was careful, respectful, not rushed. When he finished, a woman near the aisle covered her mouth. "He didn't just translate," she whispered. "He understood." Richard slammed the notebook shut. "That's enough," he said sharply. The crowd reacted immediately. "Why stop? Let him continue. We want to see." Richard forced a smile. "Of course," he said. "I just want to raise the stakes." He opened the book again. "One more," he said. "Something harder." He paused, then chose carefully. "This language," Richard said, "is not taught anywhere anymore." He watched the boy closely. For doubt. For fear. The boy read the page. His expression changed, not panic, but recognition. "This was written by a traveler," the boy said quietly. "Someone who never made it home." Richard stiffened. "Translate it," he demanded. The boy did. The words spoke of exile, of hunger, of hope written in the margins. By the time he finished, the room was completely silent. No phones, no whispers, just breathing. Richard stepped back. 5 languages. No mistakes. No hosetaschen. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. He laughed again, but this time it didn't sound like confidence. It sounded like defense. "You're prepared," he said. "You planned this." The boy shook his head. "I didn't plan to be here," he said. "I just walked in." Richard clenched his jaw. "How many languages do you think you know?" The red thread hung loosely from the notebook. It wasn't decoration. It was a warning. Richard Halvorson held the book like it suddenly weighed more than paper. "This language," he said, clearing his throat, "was given to me by a collector in Eastern Europe." No one interrupted. "It's not cataloged, not classified, and not taught." The boy nodded once. "May I?" he asked. Richard hesitated, then handed him the book. The boy's eyes moved across the page slowly. Too slowly. The room felt smaller. For the first time that evening, Richard felt exposed. The boy began to speak. The sound was unfamiliar to everyone. Rough at first, then smooth, like something old being remembered. A man in the second row leaned forward. That's a border dialect," he whispered, "from a region that doesn't exist anymore." The boy translated without raising his voice. It was a letter, written by a teacher who hid books under floorboards, who taught children quietly, knowing the words might disappear with him. When the boy finished, someone near the back quietly wiped their eyes. Richard swallowed. "That's 6, someone said. No applause. Just disbelief." Richard forced a laugh. "All right," he said loudly. "Enough of the sad stories." He flipped pages aggressively. "You're good," he admitted. "But no one is that good." The boy remained still. "I didn't say I was good," he replied. "I said I could listen." That sentence landed heavier than any translation. "This one," he said, "is written in a trade language used briefly during wartime." The boy looked up. "You don't have to test me," he said gently. "You're already convinced." Richard's jaw tightened. "Translate it," he snapped. The boy did. The words were short, efficient. They spoke of routes, borders, people moving in the dark. A former diplomat stood up slowly. That's accurate, he said, and terrifying. The room shifted again. Richard felt it. Fear doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives when the room stops taking your side. Someone from the audience finally asked the question everyone had been holding. Where did you learn all this? The boy took a breath. My mother cleaned offices, he said. She didn't come home until late. No one interrupted. I waited, he continued, and I listened. He spoke of night buses where conversations flowed freely, of secondhand radios tuned to foreign stations, of discarded books no one claimed. I didn't have teachers, he said. I had time. The room felt heavier now. Not impressed. Humbled, Richard's hand trembled as he turned the page. This one, he said quietly, is written in a ceremonial form of Japanese. A scholar in the audience inhaled sharply. That's not conversational, she whispered. It's reverent. The boy bowed his head slightly before speaking. When he translated, his tone changed. Respectful. Measured. The words described apology. Honor. Silence after failure. When he finished, no one spoke. Not because they didn't know what to say, but because saying anything felt wrong. Richard stepped back. 8 languages. The laughter from earlier felt like it belonged to another lifetime. You planned this, Richard said again, weaker now. The boy shook his head. You planned to win, he replied. I planned to understand. A few people nodded. Others looked at Richard differently now. Not as a host, but as a man losing control of his own stage. Richard stared at the final section of the notebook. His finger hovered over it. There's one left, he said softly. The boy didn't move. This one, Richard continued, was never meant to be spoken aloud. The boy looked at him. Then why did you bring it here, he asked. Richard had no answer. The boy stared at the final page. The ink was faint, the paper older than anyone in the room. He didn't speak, not because he couldn't, but because this time the words carried weight, personal weight. Richard Halvorson watched closely. For the first time that night, he wasn't waiting for brilliance. He was waiting for failure. Take your time, Richard said, trying to sound generous. The boy nodded, but instead of reading aloud, he closed the notebook. I need to explain something first, he said. The room leaned in. I wasn't always like this, the boy began. I didn't wake up knowing words no one else cared about. He spoke slowly, carefully, like he was choosing memories the way others chose sentences. My father left when I was young, he said. Not because he wanted to, because staying meant silence forever. No one asked what that meant. They understood enough. My mother worked nights. She cleaned offices where people spoke freely because they thought no one was listening. The boy paused. He talked about libraries that felt warmer than home, about old language tapes no one checked out anymore, about foreign newspapers used to wrap food. I didn't learn languages to be impressive, he said. I learned them to feel less alone. The audience shifted in their seats, not uncomfortable, connected. There was a man, the boy continued. He used to sit near the bus station. The room stayed silent. He spoke a language no one recognized. People thought he was confused. The boy swallowed. He wasn't. The man had been a teacher once, before borders changed, before schools closed. He told me, the boy said, languages die when no one listens. Richard's eyes flickered. The boy opened the notebook again. This page, he said softly, was written by him. A breath moved through the room. He wrote it because he knew his voice would be forgotten. The boy looked at Richard. You didn't collect this, he said. You rescued it by accident. Richard said nothing. The boy traced the faded lines with his finger. I can read it, he said, but it wasn't meant for applause. He looked at the audience. This is a farewell, he continued, not a challenge. Someone near the front whispered, let him speak. The boy finally began. His voice was quieter now. The language sounded fragile, like it might break if spoken too loudly. He translated slowly. It was a message about teaching children in secret, about hiding books, about knowing that someday someone would find the words and keep them alive. By the time he finished, the room felt different. Not impressed. Changed. Richard Halvorson had built his life on winning, on proving people wrong. But as the boy spoke, Richard realized something uncomfortable. He had never learned anything that didn't serve him. And this This wasn't serving anyone, except the truth. Why didn't you sell this? Richard asked quietly. The boy closed the notebook. Because some things aren't mine to profit from, he replied. No one laughed. No one moved. The room no longer felt like a stage. It felt like a place of reckoning. Richard Halvorson stood still, the notebook resting on the podium like an object that had outlived its purpose. You didn't come for the money, he repeated. The boy shook his head. I came because words are being used as a joke, he said. And they aren't. No one interrupted. Not this time. Richard had offered challenges his entire life. He thrived on control. But control only works when the rules are yours. And tonight, they weren't. There is one condition left, Richard said quietly. The boy looked at him. Not a language, Richard continued. A choice. The room leaned forward again. Richard opened the notebook one final time. This language, he said, was never written down completely. A scholar frowned. That's impossible, she whispered. It was passed orally, Richard replied. From teacher to student. He looked at the boy. No one here knows it, he said, except the man who gave it to me. The boy's breath caught. He understood now. This wasn't about proof. It was about respect. The boy closed his eyes. When he spoke, it wasn't loud. It was careful. The language flowed like memory, not sound. Short phrases. Gentle pauses. The translation followed. It spoke of responsibility, of carrying knowledge without owning it, of passing words forward without demanding credit. By the time he finished, no one was standing. They were frozen. Richard stepped away from the podium. He faced the boy, not the audience. I laughed at you, he said. His voice cracked slightly. And I was wrong. A gasp moved through the room. I confused wealth with wisdom, Richard continued. And I turned knowledge into entertainment. He swallowed. I am sorry. The boy nodded once. Not triumphant. Understanding. Richard reached into his jacket. He placed a signed check on the podium. $1 million, he said. No conditions. The boy looked at it, then looked away. I don't need it, he said, but someone else might. The room shifted again, this time with respect. If you want to make this right, the boy said, open the hall. Richard frowned. For who? For those who listen but are never invited, the boy replied. People whose voices don't look impressive. Richard stared at him, then nodded that I'll do it, Richard said. The boy exhaled slowly. But, Richard added, there's one more thing. He turned to the audience. This story doesn't end tonight. The boy looked up. The hall was still. Not a whisper. Not a cough. Not even the faint rustle of papers. Richard Halvorson lowered his head. The boy stood tall. Not proud. Not boastful. Just present. For the first time that evening, the millionaire realized something very simple. The room didn't belong to him. It belonged to the words. Richard thought of the languages he had collected over the years. Rare, expensive, forgotten by most. But he had never understood them, never felt them. The boy had. Each phrase, spoken tonight, carried someone else's story. Someone who no longer had a voice. Someone who trusted a child to keep it alive. And that was power. The audience rose slowly. Not all at once, but one by one. Some faces wet with tears. Some stiff with awe. Some smiling quietly, as if they had witnessed history. Richard felt it too. A weight lifted. A lesson learned. He stepped forward. Tonight, he said, I learned more than any check could teach me. The boy nodded. No words necessary. The boy glanced at the notebook. He closed it carefully, like closing a chapter that was never meant to be forgotten. Languages are alive, he said softly. They live where someone listens. Richard asked quietly, and what will you do now? The boy smiled faintly. I will keep listening. And maybe, one day, someone else will speak what I once heard. The crowd felt the weight of his words. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about fame. It was about respect. For knowledge. For people. For voices that might otherwise vanish. Richard held out his hand. Not as a millionaire, but as a man who finally understood. The boy shook it. Briefly. Firmly. And then he walked away and no one moved. No one spoke. Not because they didn't want to, but because silence had meaning. It said, listen, respect, understand, pass it forward. The boy disappeared into the hallway. Richard watched him go, then turned to the crowd. Knowledge, he said, is worth more than wealth. And tonight, I've learned that. The audience nodded. Slow applause began. Then a standing ovation. But the boy was gone, and the silence he left behind was louder than any applause.